An almost 300-year-old mashed potatoes recipe appears in a Michelin guide. When I found this mashed potatoes in an old cookbook, I want to try it out straight away. And I was such surprised how this simple recipe can turn out so delicious. And now I have discovered by coincidences the chef of the century, Joël Robuchon, who has 30 Michelin stars for his restaurants, who has a mashed potato recipe that is almost identical to the old recipe. I am about to introduce the old mashed potatoes recipe, but also I will show you the small difference to make this old recipe to one of the best mashed potatoes in the world, so that everyone can make it at home. It's hard to imagine Germany without potatoes, but originally it came from the New World. The potato wasn't cultivated in Germany until the 18th century. Other parts of Europe, as such like England and especially the Irish people, have cultivated the potatoes very early in the 7th century. In Ireland the potato was already a staple food at the time it starts to get popular in Germany. It feels like in Germany every small town and city have its own word to describe this bulb. The common English word is potato, but in Germany we call this Kartoffel after a Russian word. And in the common speech other words are very well known. One of them is Erdapfel, it means apple from the earth. The French use the same term, they call them pomme de terre. Another common word is a cranberry or Erdbeere. It means like pear from the ground. And very special where I came from, we called it Tüftel. I think these words came from the truffle, very well known and famous edible mushroom in Europe. I myself have started to make my own experience with the potato, because growing them is actually very simple. The potatoes are simple dug in and dug out at the harvest time. Unfortunately, my first attempts were on nutrient poor soil, but this year it will change, and I'm looking forward to harvest a lot more potatoes in this year. Today potatoes are indispensable and they're extremely popular as chips and potato chips. It was something else in America at the time of the colonization. And depending when the Germans immigrate to the States, they are known or they don't know the potatoes beforehand. And during the great immigration movement in the 19th century, I think every German knows the potato. Nevertheless, I found an exciting recipe in an old cookbook, and this cookbook is from Hannah Glasse from 747, and the recipe says to make potato pudding. Boil 2 pounds of potatoes and beat them in a mortar fine. Beat in a half a pound of melted butter. Boil it a half an hour, pour melted butter over it with a glass of white wine or the juice of Sevilla orange, and throw sugar all over the pudding and dish. That's right, potato pudding, and I called it mash. I think this is very similar or the same, or only the words are different. Back then they called it pudding, and today we call it mash. For the recipe we need 2 pounds of potatoes, or 1 kilogram in European terms. Because our own are just ripe, I harvest our own straight from the field, peel and cook them. The recipe does not specify what type of potatoes to use. Because I like the hard boiling the most, I use this. But you could also use other types or sweet potatoes instead. I peel everything a potato before cooking. You could also cook them with the skin and peel them later. One of the nicest things I can do between the cooking is feeding my chickens with the potato skins. It always makes me happy to see them happy. The cooking itself takes about 20 minutes to a half an hour. Of course, I do this over fire. About 10 minutes before the potatoes are ready, I take the pan and place it on the pot. This way it is already hot. I do this to save energy and firewood. Because the steam is enough to heat the pan, in this way I don't have to make a second fire. I simply place the pan on the top of the pot and add a half a pound of butter, which is 250 grams, to melt it. I would like to mention that the recipe properly refers to salted butter. At this time it was the only butter that is normally available. Just remember me to make a video about how to make butter. Can be also very exciting. And if you want to know this or other recipes or other techniques how the first settlers lived in America from the perspective of the German immigrants, then subscribe to this YouTube channel. This supports the next projects. And if you want to support more this project, Patreon is a great way. And if you want to see which kind of video you can expect as specials at Patreon, then you can go on the Patreon site. I have produced one example video free for everyone. You don't need to be a Patreon member. Link is below. Now the potatoes are ready and they are drained. The recipe says to mash them in a mortar. I don't have a mortar, but I do have a wonderful wood spoon with a white back, and I use this to mash the potatoes directly in the pot. I now add the melted butter to the 1 kilo of mashed potatoes. Stir this well into the potatoes and bring the new mixture back to boil. Leave the potatoes on the fire a half an hour. Be very careful not to let them burn. The mashed potatoes must therefore be stirred constantly. A big challenge when cooking over the fire is to distribute the heat evenly throughout the pot. The easiest way to achieve this is to turn the pot a quarter of a turn every few minutes. The next step makes the difference between the historical mashed potatoes and the Michelin stars one. If you want to try both, you can divide your potatoes into 2 parts. The small difference in the modern one is now milk is stirred in to make it even creamier. But because I want to limit myself in the historical recipe, I will now continue with this one. For the next step, according to the recipe, you need either a glass of white wine or orange. I adopted the orange. First, I cut a slice out of the middle for later as decoration. Then I squeeze the juice out of the orange. Now I take the pan again and put them back on the top of the pot to save energy. Add some more butter and pour in the fresh squeezed orange juice. I mix the two together carefully. Now is the time to serve. I take small bowls and pour the mashed potatoes evenly into the bowls. Pour the fresh sauce over the top. And sprinkle with a little sugar. Add a piece of orange to decorate the potato pudding. Now comes the best part of every experiment, tasting the dish. I am very curious to see how it tastes. Delicious. It tastes like potato, but in the same time it has a complete different consistency than what I know as mashed potato. It's so much creamier. The butter flavor comes through clearly. The sweetness of the quite exciting with the acidity of the orange gives a very refined taste that I can't compare to anything I ever eat in my life. It's a real shame that this recipe has been lost over time, that is no longer known or hardly produced today. I can recommend you that you try to make it yourself. You can also make it in a normal saucepan. You don't have to prepare it over a fire like I did, the way I made it now. Maybe you could use a little more orange, and you can play around with the sweetness of sugar. Add less or more. You could also add salt if you haven't used salty butter. Another recipe that totally surprised me in terms of taste is a honey wine. I spent months to make this and then stored it for several years. You can find this video linked above. A wonderful recipe from 717.